All right, welcome back, everyone. After what's been, I admit, a very long hiatus since I last did my last video, but like I explained in my last live stream, I might be taking a bit of a change of direction with this channel, and I didn't know where I was going to go with that. And I still honestly don't know exactly where I'm going to go with this channel long term, but I really want to take a bit of a change of direction, and I think the first place I'm going to start is by introducing a series on a topic I really care about, which is philosophy. So just as a brief aside, I really got discouraged by covering topical subjects and by doing reacts videos, if you will. And honestly, this is something that interests me more, and it's hopefully not going to completely and utterly depress me when it comes to making these videos. So the first concept I want to start with in philosophy is one that chronologically, in terms of when the thought experiment was first developed, is nowhere near the beginning of philosophy. And the reason I'm starting here is because these conversations on topics of philosophy aren't going to be academic topics. These are going to be practical conversations I want to have about topics and ideas and ideologies that not only help form how I view the world, but I think will help you in your everyday conversations with the people around you, and especially help better your own perspective in terms of how you question the world around you and how you view the world around you. All right, so the first thing we're going to start off with is Russell's teapot. In order to have a conversation about what Russell's teapot is and what its practical application is in the world today, we actually have to first have a very quick conversation on Occam's razor. Occam's razor is a heuristic guideline, so not an absolutism, but just a heuristic guideline. It's a rule of thumb, if you will, that suggests that between competing hypotheses, the one that should be tested is the one that makes the fewest assumptions. So this is going to actually extend into the next topic, which we'll get into towards the end of this video, and we'll introduce in the next video. But the idea of Russell's teapot is an extension of Occam's razor. So in what Bertrand Russell, who was the person who thought of this thought experiment, suggested, and this dates back to roughly 1900. I haven't really been able to pinpoint an exact date on when this thought experiment was first pined and proposed by Bertrand Russell. But the idea is, and I have to tell you that it happened around 1900 because that gives you context for the technology of the time, that there is and he used the phrase, tea kettle floating off in space. And when I say space, I don't mean necessarily the infinite mass of the galaxy or of the known universe or of the universe in general. He suggested that he was going to make the hypothetical claim that a tiny little tea kettle was floating somewhere in the space between Earth and Mars. And when he suggested this, the implication was that he wasn't talking about the straight line, the ever-changing straight line that connects, say, the absolute center of mass of Earth with the absolute center of mass of Mars. He was talking about the infinite donut that makes up the space that could possibly form between Earth's revolution, the circle that is Earth's the ellipse that is Earth's revolution around the sun, and Mars's revolution around the sun, and then staying at least relatively close to the solar plane on which those two planets revolve. So what that shape is going to form is, of course, a donut. It's not going to just be a record. It's three-dimensional, so it's going to form almost a bit of a donut. And the idea is that if there are two competing hypotheses, and one is that there is no tea kettle, and the other is that there is a tea kettle, how do I go about proving that there is a tea kettle somewhere in that space? Well, I adjust the telescope, fix my focus, and say, there it is. Look in the telescope. There it is. It's floating right there. How do I prove it's not there? How do I prove that the tea kettle is not somewhere in that infinite donut of space? And this is going to bring us to a few other topics that I think we can cover in very brief in this video. And the reason I say this is because this tea kettle can only exist in one place. So it's very easy to say, look, there it is. It's kind of like the difference between how do I prove that the line, how do I show where a break in an electrical line is if the break in the line is an above ground line versus a below ground line? Well, how do I show you that there's a break in the above ground line? Well, there it is. We can drive right by and say, right there it is. How do I prove to you that there's a break underground? Well, you can't see it until you go to expose it. But where do you go to expose the line? And that's not a perfect analogy, but with Russell's teapot, what you would basically have to have in order to prove that the tea kettle is not there is you'd have to have an infinite number of telescopes with an infinite capability to perfectly view every object that could possibly be passing through there. And the reason I say you have to have at least an infinite number of telescopes is because, well, if I say, well, then where is it? And you say, well, it's up there in that donut. If I tell you, well, it's not here, well, then you will respond with, well, it's here. Well, then I look there. Okay, it's not there. Well, it moved. It's here. Okay, well, it's not there. Okay, well, it moved. It's there. So I'd have to have an actual literal infinite supply of telescopes. Because remember, too, that in 1900, the technology of the time was such that even being able to see a teapot, an object that small between Earth and Mars, was a giant ask. And what you would do on top of all of this, if I was trying to prove that it wasn't there, is you could easily pile what are called ad hoc arguments. Ad hoc arguments are arguments where I can infinitely pile on the argument after the original argument has effectively been disproved. So in this case, I could say something along the lines of, well, it's in space. You'll be able to see it. Well, is it there? Because it's not here. Well, then it's here. But I just moved the telescope to there and it's not there. Okay, well, it moved while you're moving the telescope, so it was here. Well, it's not there because after that I moved the telescope. What that means is each one of those changes in position is an ad hoc argument. So that means I have to have an infinite array of telescopes to see everything simultaneously. And on top of that, I never specified how big the tea kettle was. I told you to use I basically implied you needed to use your imagination. Well, what if the tea kettle is smaller than what you think? What if the tea kettle isn't the size of a tea kettle? What if the tea kettle is the size of my watch? So you've got a powerful enough telescope to detect a tea kettle, but what you really need is a powerful enough telescope to detect the watch. Well, then what if it's not the size of my watch? What if it's the size of my thumb drive? And even smaller than that, what if it's the size of my pencil tip? And we can go right down to the quantum. And what you wind up getting is these ad hoc arguments that pile on to the point where not only do you need to have an infinite number of telescopes constantly monitoring that infinite space, they need to have an infinite array of coverages. So that needs to be instantaneously and simultaneously somehow focused in on an object, focused in so that it can view an object this small, and focused in so it can view an object the size of a tea kettle. So not only would you have to have that, you'd have to have them all simultaneously running and observable simultaneously. Because although I might look through one telescope, well, you had to look through that telescope because it was affixed to another position. Okay, well, that means that with this infinite supply of telescopes, I have to be monitoring this infinite space with an infinite pair of eyes. And I've only got one pair of eyes. Well, the other thing we could pile onto this ad hoc if we want to is to say, hey, I said it was there when I said it was there. So, yeah, it was true when I said it was there. But, things change over time, and let's say that this is a very special tea kettle. Let's say that this is a quantum tea kettle that can engage in quantum tunneling. So it was there, but what you have to do is you'll have to wait for it to return again. Because it has quantum tunneled and has effectively ceased to exist for the moment. And, it's going through some wormhole phase in nothingness. So it's unobservable until a certain amount of time, which means not only do I have to observe it from here to eternity, I have to have been observing it already and have to have known to have been observing it already. Like I have to know that that's something I have to do from the dawn of time, which of course requires that I have a DeLorean with a flux capacitor that works and be able to time travel on top of all of this. So in that case, what you have are a series of competing hypotheses. One hypothesis is that the tea kettle doesn't exist, and the other is that it does. And in the case of one, you have a tea kettle that's constantly moving, that is a quantum tea kettle in terms of size and in terms of its function. And I have to have a DeLorean to be able to view it, an infinite number of telescopes with an infinite array of strengths and focus points, and with an infinite set of eyes to be able to be monitoring this from the birth from the Big Bang until the death of the universe, which means I also now need to be able to literally live forever and to not have anything like my vision be affected by any outside outcomes. Or I have the assumption that the tea kettle isn't there. So in the case of Occam's razor, we would say that the thing that should be the hypothesis that should be tested is the positive claim. We should assume the null hypothesis. By the way, a null hypothesis is the hypothesis that effectively. So there's the null hypothesis is a pre-existing hypothesis. It's the pre-assumed hypothesis. In this case, when you have the tea kettle floating in space, the burden of proof is on me to show you that it exists because I'm making the positive claim. So the way that I prove to you that the tea kettle exists, again, is especially because I'm the one that knows where it is by implication. Since I know that it exists, I'm the one that must have some knowledge of where it exists, or at least some knowledge of knowledge of how to determine where it exists. So the burden of proof is on me to affix the telescope and say, there it is. The burden of proof is not on the person who says, no, it doesn't exist. Because what else are they supposed to assume? It is not possible. It is beyond the human capacity in any way to prove that it doesn't exist. So how can you apply this in your everyday life? So this isn't the actual thought experiment since the Declaration of Independence, which initially espoused the notions of free speech, the notions, at least the ideas, notions, and virtues upon which we built the concept of free speech. But it came 100 plus years after that. It came 100 plus years after our Constitution. But the underlying concept is that you always assume the negative claim when you have competing positive and negative claims until the positive claim is proved. So in a court of law, this concept, not necessarily the thought experiment, but this concept is why we have a presumption of innocence before guilt. Did you do the thing? Did I steal this pencil? Well, the accusation is that, yes, you did steal that pencil. That's the positive claim. Because I can't prove to you that I didn't steal the pencil. Because what proof would I need to have? I'd need to have a camera affixed on me from an infinite number of angles that is somehow observable simultaneously with an infinite set of eyes on one person, and which also is capable of seeing all sizes and forms of pencil and keeping me in focus and the pencil in focus and in frame at all times. And on top of all of that, it's going to have to be observing me from my birth until the moment of the accusation. So that's why in a court of law, we have the presumption of innocence before guilt. When you're having a debate with somebody, let's say a friend or someone in your family, a great way to frame the debate is to say right off the bat, okay, you're making the positive claim. The burden of proof is on you to prove the positive claim. Otherwise, we have to assume the null hypothesis, which is the negative claim. So go ahead and lead. I will let you make your positive claim, and then let's pick at that hypothesis. And this is true of the scientific method as well. The reason we have the condition for a good hypothesis as one as being disprovable is this exact thing. So if the hypothesis is, for example, that that something doesn't exist, well, you can't possibly is disprovability. So if we say something like the hypothesis is that God exists, how could I possibly disprove that hypothesis? The hypothesis is, for example, that the tea kettle is floating in space. How could I possibly disprove that claim? Well, I can prove it, but I can't possibly disprove it. So that's not a very good hypothesis. The better example, of course, is the existence of God. It's a hypothesis which is not disprovable. So when you formulate a hypothesis in testing for the scientific method, one of if not the most important features of a good hypothesis is this notion of disprovability. And this is something, by the way, that at least when I was in middle school, was beaten over our heads in every grade that you took science from middle school on. So in 7th grade, 8th grade, starting in 6th grade, to a lesser extent in 5th grade, I guess, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, every science course you will ever take, when you engage in the scientific method, one of the first things you do is you put together a hypothesis. And of course, one of the important things is that the hypothesis must be testable. And in order for it to be testable, it must be disprovable. So a good hypothesis is one that, if nothing else, is disprovable. We could take another example of if we had a hypothesis of, for example, is there such a thing? Let's do hot button topic. Is there such a thing as systemic racism in the United States? Well, I could say that there is such a thing as systemic racism in the United States, and the way that I dodge actually proving that it exists is to completely redefine these words, systemic and racism, to a point where they have no meaning, and to a point where it is impossible to disprove that the thing exists. And we're going to get into another topic beyond that in our next video that actually harkens right back to that, which goes beyond just the fact that, in that case, the burden of proof of its existence, in the case of systemic racism, the burden of proof is on the person who makes the positive claim that the United States is a systemically racist society. And again, if you define away these terms to a point where there's no possible way to even test the hypothesis because it's utterly disprovable, then the hypothesis is a useless hypothesis. And we're going to get more into that in our next video. So I hope this has helped to clear things up. I hope this has helped to educate people when it comes to that topic. And I wanted people to know not only what Russell's Teapot was, but why it's useful. And the reason I'm starting with that one, of course, is because there's really no way to, in any credible manner, build an argument without having this understanding first, that when you have competing arguments and competing hypotheses, what do you do? What's the first thing you do? Before you even discredit or credit a hypothesis, before you even go into an empirical claim and engage in any empiricism, before you go into a philosophical claim, an argument on principle, before you determine if the principles are valid, is the hypothesis testable? Is it useful? Is it disprovable? And if it is, well, then who does the burden of proof? Where does the burden of proof lie? So again, I hope this has been helpful to everyone. We will see you in the next video, which will be exploring the Carl Sagan's Dragon in My Garage. Until then, it's been Mike, signing off.